Hello, and welcome to the Good Food Institute's webinar on the state of global policy and public investment in alternative proteins. My name is Michael Carter, and I'm the Policy Specialist in Diplomacy here at GFI. Thank you for joining us today. The Good Food Institute is a nonprofit think tank working to build a sustainable, secure, and just food system by advancing alternative proteins. We work across the areas of corporate engagement, science and technology, and policy. We are funded entirely by philanthropy, so if you find the insights and resources we provide useful, please consider donating. GFI's policy teams around the world advocate for fair regulation and public research funding for alternative proteins. We build relationships with policymakers, scientists, entrepreneurs, and more to ensure that alternative proteins are a global answer to global challenges. At GFI, we focus on feeding a growing population responsibly, efficiently, and safely. Demand for meat contributes to pressing global challenges like climate change, antibiotic resistance, pandemic risk, loss of biodiversity, and hunger and malnutrition. Alternative proteins offer a globally scalable solution that can address these challenges while helping satisfy the growing global demand for meat. We map out the most neglected areas that will allow alternative proteins to compete on taste, price, and nutrition. We meet these challenges by funding open access research, developing resources, and educating and connecting the next generation of scientists and entrepreneurs working on food system sustainability. This webinar is an overview of GFI's annual State of Global Policy report, which analyzes global public investment in and the fair regulation of alternative proteins. We also publish State of the Industry reports for the plant-based, fermentation, and cultivated meat sectors. Webinars are available for all three. This year, we also released a State of Alternative Proteins report, which shares stories about the people and places advancing plant-based, cultivated, and fermentation-enabled proteins. All these reports can be downloaded for free at gfi.org. Our State of Global Policy report finds that 2024 was an action-packed year, with new public investments holding steady, several governments jumping ahead, and lots of support behind alt proteins for lots of different reasons. To best capture the dynamic nature of global policy in 2024, we're going to turn to a panel of our policy experts from around the world. Now let's introduce our panelists for today's session, starting with my colleague in Israel, Hila.
Hello, I'm Hila Goldenberg, Senior International Collaborations Manager at GFI Israel.
Hello, my name is Yeonju La, South Korea startup lead based in Seoul.
Hello, my name is Ankur Chaudhary. I'm a policy specialist working with GFI APAC. I'm based out of Singapore.
Hi everyone, I'm Radhika Ramesh. I'm a policy specialist at GFI India and I'm based in Goa.
Hello, I'm Manuel Nito. I'm a policy analyst at Brazil.
Hi everyone, I'm Kimiko Mitsui from GFI Japan.
Thank you all for joining us, and thanks to everyone joining us from around the world. We'll have time to answer some questions at the end, so if at any point you have a question for our team, please use the Q&A box below. Now, let's dive right into it. Our first question is for our colleagues in Israel, Brazil, and Asia. What were the primary motivations behind support for alt proteins in your region? We'll start with Hila.
Thanks, Michael. In Israel, support for alternative proteins is driven by three main motivations. First, economic and technological leadership. Israel ranks second in the world in total private investments in alternative proteins, with more than $1.5 billion invested in over 100 companies. So the government sees alternative proteins as a transformative technologies that can drive significant economic growth, create high-value jobs, and position Israel as a global leader in this rapidly expanding food tech sector. Supporting this sector aligns with the country's broader goal of building a thriving, future-focused innovation ecosystem. Second, food security and climate resilience. Alternative proteins are part of Israel's evolving national food security strategy. The aim is to diversify protein sources, reduce reliance on imports, and better prepare for global supply chain disruptions or zoonotic disease risks. It's both a short-term food security measure and a long-term climate adaptation tool. And third, international collaborations. Israel actively leverages its alternative protein sector as a platform for international engagement and climate diplomacy. This includes, for example, joint funding initiatives with countries like the UK and France. Israel leverages alternative protein technology as a bridge to strengthen bilateral relationships and position Israel as a collaborative leader in addressing global food system challenges.
Thank you. Ankur, same question. What were the primary motivations behind support for alternative proteins in the Asia-Pacific region?
Thank you, Michael, for the question. It's quite an interesting one to start with. The primary motivation driving support for alternative proteins across Asia Pacific are primarily food security, environmental sustainability, and economic innovation. Governments are increasingly viewing alternative proteins as strategic tools to enhance national food resilience by reducing dependence on imported animal proteins, address climate and environmental pressures such as land and water use by supporting more resource-efficient protein production. At the same point in time, the governments want to stimulate high-tech economic sectors and establish leadership in emerging food technologies, particularly cultivated meat and fermentation. A good example of it would be Malaysia, which has explicitly launched a government commission to explore cultivated meat's role in food security and environmental protection. While South Korea, for example, has set up a regulatory-free zone to promote innovation without much bureaucratic bottlenecks. So these are really good examples of how governments are supporting and the primary motivations of governments across APAC.
Thank you. And now, Manuel, what motivated support for alt proteins in Brazil?
I feel that the perspective that alternative proteins are emerging as an inevitable innovation in food sector in Brazil and as a global power in the agribusiness sector. It needs to keep up with its strengths and maintain its leading role. This trend is also evident in other Latin American and Caribbean countries. Alternative proteins enable us to keep engaged with our specialties, farming and agriculture, in a more sustainable way that also leads to a fair and more equal distribution of benefits of economical growth.
Thank you, Hila, Ankur, and Manuel. I'm hearing a lot of similarities. So we have food security, scientific leadership, economic prosperity, and some region-specific factors too. So these themes are echoed in Europe and the Americas, where public investments focused on creating jobs, spurring domestic manufacturing, and pursuing scientific leadership in a more competitive, but also more collaborative world. Now, let's take a deeper dive in the Asia-Pacific region. Asia led the world in public investment for alt proteins in 2024, especially cultivated meat. Ankur, how do alt proteins like cultivated meat help meet regional and national goals?
Sure, I think that's also like a very interesting question. So Asia Pacific public sector leadership in funding alternative proteins, especially cultivated meat, reflects a growing recognition among these governments that these innovations directly support regional and national priorities across several key policy domains. If I have to give a breakdown, I would categorize into three categories. So first would definitely be like food security and sovereignty. Like one of the challenges within Asia is that Asia is one of the world's largest food importers of animal protein. Volatile supply chains and rising global food prices threaten food resilience across economies. How cultivated meat helps? So cultivated meat allows countries to produce real meat domestically without livestock, using far less land and resources. It helps de-risk protein supply chains and ensures a local source of high quality nutrition, regardless of climate or trade shocks. And that's a huge advantage for countries within APAC. And a good example of it is again the Malaysia Feasibility Commission, which explicitly frames cultivated meat as a tool for food security. The second big aspect is climate and environmental goal. The challenge which APAC countries face are that they're under immense pressure to reduce agricultural emissions, deforestation, and biodiversity loss. And this is where alternative proteins fit in really well. Cultivated meat and plant-based proteins significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions, land use, and water consumptions compared to conventional meat. Supporting this technology is an efficient lever for national climate strategies as well. And another good example of it is the Singapore Food Story 2.0 and China Innovations Hub, which both link protein diversification to sustainability outcomes. The third big point which is there is high-tech and bioeconomy growth. The challenge which governments in APAC face is that they're prioritizing innovation-driven sectors for future growth and job creation. Where CM comes in is that CM sits at the intersection of biotech, food tech, and advanced manufacturing. Exactly the sectors many APAC economies are betting on for economic diversification and economic growth. South Korea's regulatory-free special zones and Australia's support for Cauldron Farm signal a strong push towards industrial-scale innovation. So these are, I think, three really good examples of the challenges and the solutions which cultivated meat presents, and therefore governments are coming up and they're supporting these sectors widely.
Thank you. Yeonju, how did the landscape look in South Korea specifically?
Yeah, thank you, Michael. South Korean government increasingly sees alternative proteins as a future growth engine, something that can drive high-value jobs, exports, and sustainability. And this isn't just theory. We've seen regional government actively competing to attract central government funding and alternative protein companies to their jurisdictions. In fact, 2024 was a major turning point. Government support for the sector grew significantly. Multiple ministries launched their own initiatives, and across the board, the South Korean government allocated a total of 74 billion won, which is about 53.7 million US dollars to alternative protein research and industrial development. Let me break that down a little. First, the Minister of SMEs and Startup played a leading role. They offered several research and commercialization grants and even designated a regulatory special zone for developing cultivated food. The Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, or MAFRA, also stepped in with strong support. They funded 6 different alternative protein projects under their high added value food tech program. That included 3 plant-based topics, 2 in cultivated meat, and 1 focused on fermentation. And for the first time, the Minister of Oceans and Fisheries launched a 5-year R&D program focused specifically on algae-based meat and cultivated seafood. This is a big deal, especially considering the environmental challenges Korea is facing. Sea surface temperatures around the Korean peninsula have surged by nearly 3 degrees Celsius. This has led to a sharp decline in wild animal populations, falling yields, and bankruptcies among aquaculture farms. So there is a real urgency and a real opportunity for alternative seafood from plants and cell cultivation to help make up for these losses in food, jobs, and businesses.
Thank you. Finally, GFI Japan is our network's newest affiliate organization, founded just last year. Kimiko, how has Japan approached alt proteins?
Thanks, Michael. First off, Japan doesn't yet have a dedicated policy that focuses only on alternative proteins, but government support is growing under broader priorities like food security, climate and disaster resilience, and of course, bioeconomy innovation. Back in 2023, then Prime Minister Kishida addressed the national diet and publicly emphasized the importance of food technology, including cultivated meat, for sustainable food supply, signaling its relevance to national goals. The same year, the Cabinet Office updated its bioeconomy strategy. While not naming cultivated meat directly, this highlights enabling technology like cell culturing, fermentation, and microbial engineering. Now, on the regulatory side, there's been a meaningful shift. Since around 2022, Japan has been holding closed-door expert discussion on how to approach cultivated meat, mostly within technical working groups and not open to public. But back in November last year, the Consumer Affairs Agency began open deliberations of regulatory approaches for food containing cultivated meat. This marked the first time the regulatory discussion moved into the public domain. The discussion focused on core elements like safety standard, risk assessment, manufacturing oversight, and labeling for consumer transparency. It's important to understand that Japan often takes a careful multi-stakeholder approach to food regulations, one that prioritizes scientific evidence, consensus building, and strong quality assurance and control system to ensure food safety and support long-term successful market growth. So while the process may take time, the move toward transparency and structured dialogue is an important signal of progress. In conclusion, I can say Japan is cautiously but progressively building a foundation for regulatory framework that can support cultivated food. It's not just about compliance, but it's about building public trust, supporting science-based innovation, and aligning food tech with national priorities like food security and bio-based economic growth. Now, Michael, I'd like to ask, the United States also saw a surge in support for alternative proteins, especially fermentation. How does fermentation help the US meet its own goals going forward?
Thank you, Kimiko. And thanks to all three of y'all for your very thorough, very interesting answers. It's true, the United States made a number of important public investments in fermentation specifically in 2024. We saw the Department of Commerce award $51 million to a new precision fermentation tech hub in central Illinois, which was also supported by significant state and private funding. And the Department of Defense made about a dozen grants to fermentation companies scaling up new products in biomass, gas, and precision fermentation. And the new attention to fermentation specifically isn't an accident. The government's increasing focus on making the United States a leader in biotechnology is driving public investment overall, and fermentation is an excellent field to invest in. As Ankur mentioned before, these technologies really exist right at the intersection of biotech and advanced manufacturing and also help accomplish national goals in food security and other priorities. Fermented foods specifically can support space expeditions and battlefield operations, but also create good, tasty food for consumers using crops from America's heartland and creating jobs in manufacturing. So overall, this level of support tracks with the general increases in fermentation R&D and commercialization we've seen around the world. But in 2024, the US really jumped into a leadership role. But while Asia led in cultivated meat and the US led in fermentation, these are far from the only regions where governments made efforts to support a growing alternative protein sector. So let's turn again to Israel and Brazil. How does public investment in alt proteins fit into broader economic goals? And how is support for alt proteins showing up in industrial policy? Let's start again with Hila.
Thanks, Michael. So as said, in Israel, public investment in alternative protein is seen as a strategic tool for strengthening the national economy and building new industrial pillars. So the Israel Innovation Authority plays a very central role in this, along with the Ministry of Science and Technology, offering grants that cover the entire value chain, from fundamental research all the way to commercialization. And this approach encourages both scientific progress and industrial growth. By end of year 2024, Israel has invested $129 million US in alternative proteins in total. Other ministries are also involved. The Ministry of Agriculture and the Ministry of Economy are working to embed alternative proteins into national plans, recognizing the sector's potential to create quality jobs, expand export opportunities, and position Israel as a hub for technological leadership. And all of this together helps reinforce Israel's role as a global leader in alternative protein innovation and policy development.
Thank you, Hila. Manuel, how do things look in Brazil?
Here, everything is quite connected to our industry policy as well. Our new industrial policy places sustainable and digital agro-industrial chains for food and nutritional energy security as one of its 6 axes, focusing on maintaining Brazil's leading role in the food sector in the face of innovation scenario. This promotes a connection between industrial policy and agriculture on science and technology policies, which have been the basis for public investment, especially in the form of R&D support. With COP30 in Brazil here in 2025, this process also reverberated in conferences diplomatic discussions.
Exciting news from both of you. One word we heard a lot in 2024 was bioeconomy, which refers to the developing part of the economy that involves biotechnology research, production, and marketing. National bioeconomy plans are taking shape around the world as governments decide how to support this new source of jobs, markets, and tax revenue, including notable new plans from India and China in 2024. Radhika and Ankur, how might India's and China's major national bioeconomy plans support alt proteins?
Thanks, Michael. I can talk about India first. We're seeing some exciting and positive policy developments, especially as the national government has officially recognized alternative proteins in their national policy. The Department of Biotechnology and the Biotech Industry Research Assistance Council in August of 2024 launched the Biotechnology for Economy, Environment, and Employment policy, which is also called the BioE3 policy. And we're very thrilled that the policy includes alternative proteins as one of the 6 key thematic sectors, and they recognize alternative proteins as one of the pillars for India to emerge as a global leader in bioinnovation. There's a huge funding component as well as part of the policy. There's also a focus on research, infrastructure creation, regulatory support, skill development, and public-private partnerships. While specific funding allocations are still evolving, a grant call was published in February 2025 on alternative protein discovery, research, and scale-up, which signals growing interest and investment in this area from the government. We'll know the results of that call by the end of this year. Ever since the launch of the BioE3 policy, we've been seeing that regional governments are also now looking at ways to support infrastructure development to support the scale-up and commercialization of alternative proteins. Overall, we're very thrilled, and this policy development signals that the government views alternative protein as a technology that contributes to the economic growth and bioeconomy of India, especially in a sustainable and green manner.
Thank you, Radhika. Ankur, how have China's bioeconomy plans developed?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. I think China has explicitly integrated alternative proteins into its national bioeconomy and food security plans, positioning itself as one of the global leaders in alternative protein development. I think there are 3 things which are quite notable. First is the massive public investment which China announced. So in 2024, China launched a 6.8 billion, which is roughly like $1 billion USD fund for agriculture, science, and technology innovation hub, with one innovation base dedicated to alternative proteins. The National Alternative Protein Technology Innovation Center also received government approval, formalizing alternative proteins in national R&D. The second thing which they did really well was the regulatory standard setting. So they drafted the industry standards for plant-based foods, which were introduced in 2024 by the Chinese Institute of Food Science and Technology, indicating progress towards national regulatory clarity, which we hope that would soon extend to cultivated meat and fermentation. The third portion is definitely strategic alignment, where alternative proteins align with China's climate, food security, and technologically self-reliance goals, especially as it wants to reduce meat imports dependence and address resources, especially land constraints.
Thank you both. Really exciting developments from both India and China on developing the bioeconomy. As we heard in that last piece, investment isn't the whole story, as important as it is. Governments also have to fairly regulate and approve new food products to remain competitive. Hila, Israel made some exciting progress in the fair regulation of alt proteins in 2024. Can you share some more with us?
Sure. Israel's Ministry of Health is very much focused on developing strong regulatory frameworks, ensuring clear guidance and predictable pathways for product approvals. We've seen some very exciting regulatory approvals last year. In November 2024, Israeli startup Imagine Dairy secured clearance from the Ministry of Health for its fermentation-derived animal-free protein to be used in dairy products. This marked Israel's second major approval of such products after Remilk's approval earlier that year. And that paves the way for commercial sales of cream cheese, yogurt, ice cream, all made with the alternative proteins. Another advancement was in the Ministry of Health's work in establishing transparent safety frameworks. The ministry's Department of Food Risk Management published detailed guidance for submitting safety dossiers for alternative protein products. This guidance streamlines the approval process and provides clarity for entrepreneurs, encouraging innovation while ensuring public health. And lastly, international standards leadership. Israel's proactive efforts to shape international standards for cultivated meat through ISO highlight its role as a pioneer in global regulation. This move helps ensure fair competition and consistent safety requirements for companies operating internationally.
Wonderful. Thank you. Now, as public investment and regulatory progress continue, regional hubs where research, entrepreneurship, and manufacturing cluster together are beginning to form. Let's start in Asia and work our way west. Ankur, where are regional hubs forming in the Asia-Pacific region, and how are government policies supporting these?
Sure. Thank you, Michael. I think there are two countries which I would definitely like to highlight where we see the regional hubs forming. One is definitely Singapore, which has which becomes like Asia's first mover when it comes to regulatory and innovation hub. So government has announced a great support of 40 million Singapore dollars allocated under the Singapore Food Story 2.0 program in 2024, with 5 projects focused on cultivated meat alone. Second is they launched a second Future Foods call for proposals targeting plant-based and fermentation technologies. The third thing which makes it really interesting is that they passed the Food Safety and Security Bill, which is the FSSB bill, in January 2025, providing a clearer novel food regulatory pathway, which declared cultivated. At the same point in time, Singapore became the first country where MUIS, the Singapore Islamic body, declared cultivated meat halal under certain conditions, which were again a first. So this does crown Singapore, gives Singapore like a hub status where it becomes like a global regulatory pioneer and test bed for novel food approvals with strong R&D investment and export-oriented ambitions. The second country, which a set of countries which I would like to highlight is Australia and New Zealand, which have become a hub for production and ingredient development. So government supported Cauldron Farm in building APAC's first large-scale precision fermentation contract manufacturing site. New Zealand Endeavour Fund awarded $5.9 million US for seafood cell line development. Daisy Lab, for example, received EPA approval to scale fermentation-derived dairy proteins. So this gives Australia like a hub status where it becomes, because of its strong capabilities in business-to-business manufacturing and novel food ingredient R&D, particularly in fermentation and cultivated meat cell lines.
Thank you. Yeonju, are we seeing any hubs form in South Korea?
Yes, absolutely. So in April 2024, the South Korean government designated the regulatory-free special zone for cultivated food in North Gyeongsang Province, the red-colored region in the map. The zone spans Uiseong County, Andong City, and Yeongju City in the province, with Uiseong Bio Valley being the main area. The Bio Valley hosts the Cell Culture Industry Support Center and a GMP facility for culture media. Also, a new food tech research support center will be built next to the two buildings. Notably, this zone does not automatically allow commercial sale of cultivated meat, but it does allow companies to demonstrate products, and crucially, it removes legal barriers around acquiring high-quality cell lines, a big hurdle for R&D. Is backed by 19.9 billion won, about $14.4 million US in funding through 2028. About 10 companies are participating, and the focus is on 2 core projects. One, to establish national level cell banks, and the other to build proof of concept for cultivated food products. So all in all, it's clear that South Korea isn't just watching the alternative protein sector, it's investing in it strategically, and it's doing so with an eye towards long-term resilience in both the economy and the food system. Michael, what regional hubs are forming in Europe and North America?
Thank you, Yeonju. Incredible updates from you both. Europe and North America are certainly seeing the development of regional hubs form around hotspots of public and private investment, research centers, and business-friendly locales. So, for example, the United Kingdom is positioning the country as a hub of alternative protein research and development, with the government forming research networks across multiple universities focusing on cultivated, fermented, and plant-based foods, as well as support for businesses conducting research and scaling up production. The Netherlands, which has long been a leader in supporting cellular agriculture, is also developing a regional hub around universities, as well as publicly supported contract research and development organizations, which unite scientists and startups in developing products and new techniques. Canada, of course, leads in public support for the plant-based sector through Protein Industries Canada, which is developing the country into a regional and perhaps global hub of plant-based protein innovation through public-private partnerships with researchers and startups to innovate new products, develop ingredients, and create a start-to-finish pipeline for plant-based alternative proteins. And finally, the Illinois Fermentation and Agriculture Biomanufacturing Hub that I mentioned earlier aims to transform central Illinois in the United States into a regional hub for precision fermentation. The hub brings in stakeholders from all kinds of sectors, including corn growers and processors, scientists, entrepreneurs, local policymakers and unions, and more, to develop a regional ecosystem that can support a fermentation sector from start to finish. So these regional hubs are possible because policymakers are taking action to bring in different sectors, spur research and entrepreneurship, and support alternative proteins with fair regulation and access to public investment. But despite all the good news, forward momentum, and promise from alt proteins, there continued to be opposition as well in 2024. Manuel, what does this opposition look like in South America, and what do governments risk by restricting alt proteins? Do we still have Manuel on the call? It looks like we don't. I will go ahead and share a little bit from Europe and North America, where we also experienced some opposition to alt proteins. We saw efforts to ban cultivated meat and restrict product labeling in several European countries and US states, though few of these efforts came to fruition thanks to opposition from business leaders, scientists, consumers, policymakers, and even ranchers. In spring 2024, the state governments of Florida and Alabama enacted laws banning cultivated meat. However, most US states have acknowledged that such bans pose barriers to a competitive and open marketplace. Of the 12 states that introduced cultivated meat bans in 2024, only those 2 enacted legislation. And since then, the United States has seen even more bills defeated by coalitions of consumers, businesses, and farmers, with even prominent groups of ranchers publicly opposing these bans on the grounds that they harm freedom of choice and violate the free market. Likewise, in Europe, after Italy banned cultivated meat in 2023, Hungary introduced a proposed national ban in July 2024, targeting both the production and marketing of cultivated meat. This proposed legislation was submitted through the European Union's Technical Regulation Information System procedure, through which several EU member states expressed concerns about Hungary's proposed restrictions, and the European Commission suggested the ban could be unjustified and potentially harmful to the integrity of the EU single market. For now, Italy's ban on cultivated meat remains in effect, but it could now be vulnerable to a legal challenge once cultivated meat is approved for sale in the EU. Overall, these challenges create real obstacles towards the success of alternative proteins in the marketplace, and hampering that progress could mean losing out on the economic growth, job creation, scientific leadership, and food security that alternative proteins offer. But looking at the big picture, it's clear that policymakers are increasingly seeing this promise and investing in the R&D and industrial policy that can make it a reality. Throughout this conversation, we've heard exciting and inspiring progress from around the world and see signs of even more to come in the first half of 2025. Now let's turn towards some of the questions from the chat. All right. We have a couple of questions for Kimiko in GFI Japan. Kimiko, do you want to take it from here?
Sure. I was preparing this question, but which one should I go first? Let me see. The top one, the Mr. Hiroshi Watanabe, you have asked 4 questions. So number 1, it is accurate to say Japan is not currently a global frontier in alternative proteins innovation, especially when compared to ecosystem like US, Singapore, or Israel, where they are recognized as startup nation. However, it could be more precise to say Japan is cautiously tailoring with a long-term quality focus orientation. And Japan's stakeholders, particularly in food, do not prioritize being first to market, but instead their strategic mindset is centered around becoming the best in market in the long run. And the second point is that most of the food companies are small to medium size, and they are not globally operative in terms of producing food and having a supply chain and sales channel. However, the shrinking population and smaller markets size is forcing them to look outside Japan. So I am expecting to see more food supply chain businesses looking for opportunity for outside Japan. So I'm very optimistic for their progress. And the second, what are the root issues here? I have mentioned already some of the points on the question 1, but several structural and cultural factors contribute to that root cause. The number 1 is a low talent mobility. We had a legacy of lifetime employment limits, which limits lifetime employment at the private sector. So it's not uncommon for one person to stay with one company for their lifetime of their labor force period, which limits the flow of entrepreneurial talents or R&D talents into a startup ecosystem. And they are trying to change this labor laws for more increased knowledge sharing. And the companies are now allowing people to have a double work if they want to. And the second is a conservative corporate culture, especially food companies operating highly interconnected supply chains. So they are very tightly knit value chains, and they are the consensus building and ecosystem building are very highly connected to not having someone doing something outside the box, but they are moving forward with discussion and alignment, which limits the innovation moving forward in the first phase. And this risk aversion in food is another point. And the Japanese food sector is exceptionally cautious when the first mover risk is rarely accepted. Quality assurance and quality control comes in the first thing in the mind in food sector. So the companies prefer to follow one regulatory and public acceptance are clearly established. And also because we don't have a much stronger startup culture, internal due diligence when it comes to external engagement creates a very heavy due diligence. So even though they start working on alternative proteins, they don't necessarily come out talking about it publicly. They will do so after they secure the actual product line coming up and after they secure intellectual properties. And the number three, for the number three, I would say this is just my personal pick, but for cultivated meat, we have leading scientists and expertise from regenerative medicine and tissue engineering. A lot of researchers coming from biomedical backgrounds. So their focus is on creating structured meat, meaning steak-like cuts. So we have a lot of opportunity for producing a steak meat or next generation cultivated meat formats that deliver premium quality. For the precision fermentation, traditional fermentation, as some of you know, we do have a strong, very long history of fermentation, and we do have a lot of research based on traditional fermentation. So I'm hoping to see a lot of researchers inviting more traditional fermentation researchers to try new mycoproteins or alternate proteins with next generation technology. And for the microalgae and mycoprotein, the government is supporting and investing in using microalgae for closed loop supply chain for food ingredients. So I'm very optimistic for in the long run, they will come in a very expansive market. For the question 4, what must they do in order to enhance the protein strategy as a country? I would say we are looking for industries buying in terms of R&D investment. And how they trigger this is excitement from consumers. That's what I like to see. I hope this answers your question, Mr. Watanabe.
Thank you very much, Kimiko. I think those that analysis and those takeaways apply very broadly across governments as well. We could certainly use higher investment in alternative proteins across the board. I will now pass it to Yeonju. We have a question on South Korea and companies that have succeeded in commercialization.
Yeah, okay. So the question asks whether there has been any company succeeded in fermentation and cultivated meat. So as for the cultivated meat and seafood, there are about 10 companies working on commercialization of this technology. We don't have an approved product yet, but one company has submitted their approval dossier last year and is waiting to receive an approval this year. So hopefully we will have a cultivated seafood product in the market this year. And there are a few more companies that are very close to submitting their applications. So I'd say the commercialization of cultivated meat and seafood in Korea is very, very close. And regarding precision fermentation, we have very few companies working on precision fermentation derived food product. This is because the regulatory pathway for precision fermentation for food has been very unclear until recently. But last year, the regulator updated their existing novel food framework to include something like using novel food using culturing microorganisms. So this gives some way that the precision fermentation companies can utilize, but I would recommend any companies working on this precision fermentation technology seek specific feedback from the local regulator. Yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you so much. Our next question Is from Christopher. Given the alignment for developing the alternative protein space, has there been any focus on regulatory agility to create systems or modify regulatory processes to expedite reviews and create efficiencies? I hope that our presentation addressed part of this answer for you. We've seen quite a bit of innovation from regulators in the past few years and last year, as a growing number of jurisdictions are seeing alternative proteins as an opportunity and recognizing that a lot of regulatory systems are not equipped to handle this kind of regulatory approval process on a regular basis. So thanks to, I think, pioneering regulatory work by Singapore, the United States, Israel, and more, we're seeing a lot of these jurisdictions start to learn from each other, watching how these first movers approach the regulatory process. And we've seen a number of countries develop a collaborative approach, working with startups and with scientists to help establish a system that works well for everybody, that is safe and fair, and also efficient, and doesn't use too many government resources. So we've seen specific examples in the United Kingdom, the regulatory sandbox, in South Korea, the regulation-free zone. We've seen in Australia and New Zealand, a more collaborative process, the a regulator there working with companies, and some other examples. I will briefly open it up to the rest of our panelists if you have anything to add. All right, then we will take it forward. Our next question is from Ite on cultivated meat and fermentation, and looking at the differences between the two and why we would focus on cultivated meat when it is at an earlier stage of readiness. This is a really great question. And I think there are a couple of reasons why we really approach alternative proteins as a holistic field, with a lot of different options. First and foremost, different regions of the world, as we can attest to, have different preferences, different things that consumers look for in food. Is it primarily taste or price or nutrition, or cultural aspects, religious aspects? We find that there is not a one-size-fits-all approach, and that's why we're starting to see some of the differences in how different countries invest in different pillars of the alternative protein sector broadly. And it's important for us to, as GFI and as supporters of all proteins and a more sustainable food supply, really keep our attention on all of these, because all of them provide different benefits that the others can't. And then as far as, resource allocation, we're still not at a place where we find that public investment in alt proteins is competitive within alt proteins. So we follow a benchmark at GFI set by the GINA report that came out a few years ago, which says that for alternative proteins to have a real benefit, we need around $10 billion in annual investments. In 2024, we came to almost 6% of that. So at this point, we are really trying to expand the pie as much as possible, and we're not in a place where we find that support for one is necessarily coming at the cost of support for another. Do any of our panelists have anything to add there?
Sure, Michael, if I may add a perspective here, we do think that cultivated meat, biomass fermentation and plant-based proteins are complementary approaches, so they're not competing with each other. They're not mutually exclusive, so each serves a different consumer need, culinary use case, as well as market segment. The second aspect, which is there, is the that cultivated meat is R&D intensive now, but has huge potential. So investors and a lot of governments view it as a high risk, high reward moonshot, which is worth pursuing now to de-risk and unlock its future. At the same point in time, one of the other things which is there is that not all emphasis is proportional. So, to your point, the attention and funding which cultivated meat receives may not always align with its current scalability or cost competitiveness. But there is a growing recognition that it still is something which is valid, has a unique long-term potential even though like in its early, it's still in its early stages and expensive, it has a huge amount of potential because of which governments and investors and companies are betting on it.
Thank you. I hope we answered your question. And as always, if anyone has follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us. I think we have time for just one more. I want to pass this one to Radhika. For the countries where we have a GFI footprint, how do assessments of progress in other nations influence their own policy making in plant-based cultivated meat and precision fermentation policies? Or at the moment, is it largely informed by internal priorities?
I really like this question because it's also about GFI's policy work. In India, the policymakers definitely are curious about global developments, but their decisions are rooted in what makes most sense for India's economic growth and food security. But yes, as a part of our policy work, we highlight progress. For example, certain regulatory developments are shared with India's regulatory body, since there is still some regulatory uncertainty around novel foods, for example. Similarly, we also highlight case studies around public-private partnerships and infrastructure developments that have happened in other regions. Although the scale of funding from the Indian government might turn out to be much smaller in India due to the need to balance several national priorities. So I think it's a mix of both to answer this question.
Do we have any other perspectives? Great. I will just add to close us out that here in the United States, we absolutely see a mix of both. Alternative proteins are a great solution to address many domestic priorities, from food security to job creation, advanced manufacturing, and more. But also, when alternative proteins are biotechnology, and biotechnology is an increasingly internationally competitive space where the countries that move first have the chance to really get an advantage and build the industry into something that they can shape and they can benefit from. So that's the context in which we see support for alternative proteins growing around the world. We see more support from policymakers and a growing level of excitement behind these foods. So that is all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for joining this conversation, and please feel free to keep it going by reaching out to us at any time. Again, you can access the 2024 State of Global Policy Report at gfi.org/global policy. Thank you.